Afternoon, and thank you for joining us virtually for this third and final installment of this very important webinar series presented in partnership with CyberWell. My name is Miranda Brenner, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at the Florida Holocaust Museum. And I want to thank you all for joining us today and spending some time with us to talk about the state of online anti-Semitism. The Florida Holocaust Museum is very honored to be working with CyberWell to bring you this important discussion. And today's program will include a presentation by Tal-Or, Cohen, Montemayor, followed by a Q&A. So please type your questions into the Q&A box on your screen, and we will do our best to address as many as we can within the time allowed. Before we get started, I would like to introduce our two panelists for today's session. Tal-Or, Cohen, Montemayor, and Mike Eagle. Tal-Or is founder and executive director of CyberWell, an independent nonprofit organization that leverages data and technology to develop anti-Semitism compliance solutions for social media companies in big tech in order to close enforcement and policy gaps online and in digital platforms. In 2022, Tal-Or founded and launched CyberWell, the first ever open database of online anti-Semitism in multiple languages, available at app.cyberwell.org. Tal-Or was recently honored by the Florida Holocaust Museum for her illuminating work with the Loewenberg Humanitarian Award, and has spoken at prominent conferences and forums, including the U.S. State Department's Symposium on Collaborative Action Against Online Anti-Semitism, the Interparliamentary Task Force to Combat Online Anti-Semitism, the Eradicate Hate Global Summit, and the IAC National Summit, Tel Aviv University's Cyber Week, and more. Mike Eagle is the interim CEO and board chair emeritus at the Florida Holocaust Museum and the chair of the Florida Commissioner of Education's Task Force on Holocaust Education. The grandson of Holocaust survivors, Mike frequently speaks about his family's experience and has seen firsthand how Holocaust education improves the world. Thank you both so much for being here, and Tal-Or, I'll turn it over to you.
There you go. Thank you so much, Miranda. I can see that everybody hopefully can hear me and see me. It's an honor to be with you here in the afternoon, Sunday your time. And we're going to take a deep dive look into current trends in online anti-Semitism and really wrap up this three-part speaker series that's connected to misinformation and disinformation and how that all connects to what we're seeing online in terms of online anti-Semitism. So it's a pleasure to be with you here today. As Miranda mentioned, CyberWell is a startup independent nonprofit dedicated to driving the enforcement and improvement of community standards and hate speech policies, so the rules that govern the biggest social media platforms of our time, in direct partnership with those platforms, and empowering efforts against anti-Semitism with the data that we collect. We launched the first ever open database of online anti-Semitism in May 2022, and we were onboarded within less than a year of that as a trusted partner of the major social media platforms, working directly with Meta, covering Facebook and Instagram, TikTok, and also sharing data directly with the other platforms that we monitor, YouTube and X. What's unique about CyberWell is that this is exclusively what we do, looking at online anti-Semitism and really doing a deep narrative analysis on that, and in multiple languages, I may add, in English and in Arabic. Today, our platform has flagged over 500,000 pieces of content that are highly likely to be anti-Semitic, and have vetted and reported over 10,500 of those examples, which yielded in the removal or actioning of well over 200,000 pieces of content online. So what I hope to share with you today are some of the top line insights from that data collection, monitoring, and vetting to really give you a clearer understanding of when we say online anti-Semitism, or you may hear about it in articles, what does that actually mean? So first of all, just like we had excellent work defining what misinformation and disinformation are at the beginning of our previous speaker series, I do think it's important to take a minute to really define what anti-Semitism is. right? So the definition that CyberWell uses to define anti-Semitism is based off of the IHRA, or International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, definition of anti-Semitism. This is a working definition of anti-Semitism, which has its roots in international law. As early as the definition is since 2009, when collaborative work through IRA started on the working definition from across the international legal and policymaking sphere. Actually, the IRA working definition, which was passed in 2016, was largely based on the United States State Department definition of anti-Semitism and can be broadly broken down into 4 subcategories. One of them being classic anti-Semitism, which covers everything from violence, calling for violence against Jews, justifying violence against Jews, especially in the case of justifying a radical ideology, for example, radical Islam or Nazism for that matter, any type of conspiracy theory or tropes about Jewish power, stereotypes about Jews, being greedy, being in any kind of cabal or agenda to run the world, or scapegoating Jews for anything from natural disasters to blood libels, for example, classically, the killing of Simon of Trent, or the accusation that Jews kill children for ritual purposes. So that's classic anti-Semitism, very much rooted in stereotypes and religious anti-Semitism. We also have Holocaust abuse, which covers denial, distortion, or trivialization of the memory of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. Political anti-Semitism, which is the accusation that Jews are more loyal to Israel than the countries of their citizenship. And I want to add an important historical context here, that dual loyalty is actually a form of anti-Semitism that existed long before the existence of the State of Israel. Just before the State of Israel, it was the accusation that Jews were not loyal for whatever reason to their own countries, that they were only loyal to themselves or to some type of alternative agenda. And then Israel-based anti-Semitism, which can largely be summed up as leveraging any classic or religious anti-Semitism in order to purposefully characterize the nature of the Jewish state or Israelis themselves. So projecting that classic anti-Semitism onto Israel as the Jewish state. There's also the political element of either denying the right of Jews to self-determination, leveraging double standards against the state of Israel, or comparing Israel or Israeli policy to that of the Nazis. And probably most importantly, and probably something that's very characteristic of the anti-Semitism that we have seen since October 7th, is holding Jews, wherever they are, accountable for the actions of the state of Israel. I put an asterisk here because, as far as I'm professionally concerned, this is actually a form of political anti-Semitism. It wouldn't be legitimate for us to, stop a woman with hijab on the street and accost her of being an agent of the IRGC in Iran. It's no more legitimate to stop a Jewish person, visibly Jewish person on the street, and accuse them for being responsible for the actions of the state of Israel. That's why it's a form of anti-Semitism, because you're effectively accusing the Jewish person of being an agent of a state, a foreign state. So that's important for me to just define professionally what we're looking at here when we talk about anti-Semitism. And let's talk about, from that academic, semi-legalistic definition, what we see with anti-Semitism today. So I want to share with you that I've been doing this work in anti-Semitism actually since the Tree of Life synagogue shooting. That's when I left my career in law and transitioned into the world of open source intelligence and business intelligence. And that's when I started down the path of looking at extremism online and online anti-Semitism. But on October 7th, the first phone call I received from Israel was from a partner of mine at one of the social media platforms, essentially asking for help. So that really speaks to how closely we work with the social media platforms. But I can tell you, as someone who opened up their laptop in the middle of the night in Los Angeles and looked at what was happening online, is that very simply, October 7th was the most successful hijacking of mainstream social media platforms, of our most used apps and services by a terrorist group, by the terrorist group Hamas. And it wasn't only the hijacking of these social media platforms, meaning they were literally filming this attack and perpetuating it far beyond its point of time and space. and terrorizing entire communities of Jews across the world with the fact that they dumped this horrific attack into engagement algorithms, but it was also the iconicization, meaning making the terrorists themselves rock stars, celebrating the actual acts themselves. And I really do think that this has national security implications when we think about the ways that other terrorist groups have learned from this attack so successfully being broadcasted on major social media platforms. But I want to share with you today how this changed the state of online Jew hatred in numbers and in insights. So first of all, I can share with you that CyberWell's AI monitoring system tracked an almost 86% increase in the first 3 weeks following the October 7th attacks, meaning almost double the amount of online anti-Semitism that we were used to seeing. And again, this is a system for highly likely to be anti-Semitic content. Over the 11 months following October 7th, we saw a 36% increase overall, and those numbers have remained high, meaning still a year and a half later, we are experiencing elevated levels of digital Jew hatred following this horrific attack, which was, of course, the worst attack on Jewish people since the Holocaust, with the goal of committing an ethnic cleansing or a genocide on them. Here we have a breakdown of something that was also very indicative of the digital Jew hatred that we saw at the time following the October 7th attacks. As I mentioned, we monitor in both English and in Arabic. In our Arabic data set, 61% of the verified online anti-Semitic content was actually calls for more violence or justifying violence against Jewish people, meaning the overall nature of the Jew hatred that we were seeing, which was typically very much rooted in classic anti-Semitism, after October 7th shifted drastically to be overtly more violent. And these numbers were also reflected in our English data set as well, meaning for the first time since CyberWell started doing this monitoring, we saw that calls to overt violence against Jewish people online surpassed the double digits, when before that they were very much contained to a smaller point of the subset. The other thing that we saw on October 7th and then the weeks following was a new abuse of the latest technologies, including generative AI technologies, to basically make a visual argument or make the visual anti-Semitism more clear and readily available to everyone. And what you can see here is also the horseshoe theory, which means the meeting of two extremes converging on the agreed upon whipping boy, the Jewish people, from both sides of the political and religious spectrum. So on the left, you have this AI-generated, created image of the Nukhba terrorists reaching Al-Aqsa, effectively showing what it would have been like if they were victorious in their invasion. On the right, this is a grab from TikTok. You have the Muhammad, the prophet, slaying the Zionist beast. And in the middle, we have a actually white supremacist response to the October 7th attack, showing that the Zionists or the Jews are actually the predators against the white future. So this was really a convergence of very radical ideologies taking an opportunity to perpetuate the same violence that they saw online by actually expressing radical anti-Semitism via these new generative AI platforms. Another thing that I want to, can you guys see my screen? Yes. Another thing that I wanted to point out, since this is also very connected to misinformation and disinformation. So we talked about the power of being exposed to misinformation or to disinformation. And then once you are exposed to that disinformation or misinformation, how difficult it is to actually say that you were wrong or be convinced otherwise. We see a very clear indication that there were different points in the conflict where disinformation that was spread on social media actually was picked up on by trusted sources. And that had a direct effect on the level of open anti-Semitism on social media platforms as well. One such incident was the Al-Alhi Arab Hospital explosion, which, based off of social media videos and purposeful disinformation, was blamed on the Israeli forces with original claims being at least 500 dead in this attack against this hospital. What turned out afterwards with an investigation and with a phone call that the IDF released was this actually was an explosion by the Palestinian Islamic Jihad that misfired a rocket towards Israel and outside of the hospital claimed tens of lives. What was the response online after this piece of disinformation was picked up on widely by the New York Times and by the BBC? We saw an increase of 1,600% in the exposure to the hashtag Hitler was right on X. That was in English, and in Arabic it went up by 29,000%, getting a total potential reach of well over 25.5 million views. So this shows you how there is absolutely a very clear impact when disinformation becomes the narrative or becomes a widely held belief, how that absolutely affects anti-Semitism. And I'm sure I'll have a chance to talk to Mike about that further. Another thing that I want to share with you, what's unique about what CyberWell does, is that we focus on really taking a look at the common narratives online. And I want to share that this is really an indication of what are the top performing openly anti-Semitic narratives per platform. You'll see that there is overlap here. So on Facebook and on X in 2024, this is based off of our latest annual report, the top performing narrative is that Jews are controlling the world or dominating the world order. YouTube and TikTok is more the characterization of religious anti-Semitism, saying that the Jews are the synagogue of Satan. That's based off of a misquote of the New Testament. And Instagram, the Rothschild conspiracy theory, very, very specific. These are kind of the sub-narratives, but really what I want you guys to understand today is that from an anti-Semitism perspective, the reason that we're deeply alarmed with the way that these narratives are performing online, if we broke down these sub-narratives into larger themes, what we saw prior to October 7th is that the classic anti-Semitic narrative accusing Jews of being in some type of world conspiracy of control or dominating the world was the most popular anti-Semitic narrative. But after October 7th, we've seen a very clear trend towards sub-narratives that characterize Jews as inherently evil from a religious perspective or as an enemy. And the reason that I point out this very worrying shift is because very simply, this is a shift into open dehumanization. And really, there are very legalistic definitions of what anti-Semitism is and characterizing it exactly. And the 11 examples of the IRA working definition have been extremely informative in CyberWell's work. But what I want to really make very simple for a second here, anti-Semitism is the open normalization of being hostile towards Jewish people, expressing animosity towards Jews, humiliating Jews, and making that a normal day-to-day event. No more is anti-Semitism present, normalized, and that baseline threshold is brought up in terms of how much anti-Semitism there is than in the online space. And when that narrative takes a dehumanizing turn, that's where we get very concerned, because historically, that's when the tide is shifting towards violence, because the less you see another group as human, the more likely you are at a minimum to remain indifferent or to tolerate hostilities against them. And when historically societies have become anti-Semitic and violent against their Jews, it's because that threshold is too high, the threshold of being regularly exposed to anti-Semitism. Another very important element of anti-Semitism today is the denial narrative. The denial narrative, meaning denying the anti-Semitic agenda of attacks, started actually with the October 7th denial campaign online, which was a disinformation campaign. The definition of disinformation, as a reminder, is the purposeful fabrication of falsehoods or misstating a fact in order to cause harm. In this case, the harm was meant to deny the victimhood of the Israeli victims of the October 7th attacks. Now, CyberWell, because we're working directly with social media platforms, really tries to look at these narratives from a policy perspective. So the good news is that in terms of all social media platforms today, Holocaust denial is prohibited content. It's content that is not allowed on all major social media platforms, and many social media platforms have violent event denial policies that also cover Holocaust denial, Sandy Hook school shooting denial, and even the Rwanda genocide denial. So CyberWell's initiative was to not only dive into this October 7th denial campaign, but really call on social media platforms to effectively remove it. Now, what do we mean by October 7th denial? We mean 3 primary tenets or beliefs that CyberWell has tracked since October 8th, which is when this denial campaign started. The first tenet or belief is the accusation that there was no rape or large-scale sexual violence against the Israeli victims. The second is that Israel actually orchestrated the attack, that this was a false flag attack, that it was purposefully orchestrated by Israel in order to what? In order to gain some type of money. It's been very interesting to see that today almost 50% of people who espouse October 7th denial online believe that Israel actually orchestrated the attack themselves. And we'll talk in a minute about why denial as a conspiracy theory is actually a form of anti-Semitism. So if we look at what the academic and the legal world has learned about Holocaust denial and why is Holocaust denial, distortion, or abuse even included in the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism. I'm going to quote a dear friend and colleague of mine, Deborah Lipstadt, the former ambassador, special envoy to fighting anti-Semitism, who said to me when I presented this work to her, denial is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. It actually is an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that brings you through every tenet of anti-Semitic belief. What do we mean? When you deny any type of atrocity against Jewish people, you're effectively saying, number one, Jewish life, but more importantly, Jewish death is not important. That's the first step of dehumanization. We are casual about Jewish death. We don't care about Jewish death. It's not important. It didn't happen. Move on. Okay, well, if you're saying that it didn't happen whatsoever, somebody who's going down this denial narrative or being exposed to this disinformation will say, if it didn't happen, why is everyone talking about it? That's resting on another anti-Semitic belief. Well, if the Zionists or the Jews are controlling the media, which is a classic anti-Semitic stereotype, then they're going to want you to talk about this lie. That's why you're hearing about it everywhere. Okay, well, why do they want us to talk about it? They want you to talk about it because they're in it for money. So it's full circle. Every station of anti-Semitic belief is very wrapped up in a denial narrative. And I think for me, myself personally, what I learned on October 7th, and I have learned since then looking at online anti-Semitism, is that actually the lessons of Holocaust denial apply to the purposeful denial of every form of atrocities committed against Jews for being Jews. What we also saw about the October 7th denial is that this received a lot of exposure. So this is based off of only an initial data set of just 300 examples in the first 3 weeks, reaching 25 million people. So a small data set of 300 examples reached 25 million people in 3 weeks. That means that the denial narrative is now platformed in a way that Holocaust denial never was, because it was being defended by the academic fringe. And despite the fact that the social media platforms had policies on the books that would absolutely empower them to remove this narrative, we saw that their rates of removal in the first few weeks following October 7th for denial, October 7th denial content were below 9%, which is far below average from what CyberWell tracks, which sits at about 50%. In addition, we can't just define misinformation and disinformation as a definition. We have to understand that our social media platforms are actually being rigged and abused by inauthentic behavior like fake accounts. So we found a network or a cell of accounts that were amplifying October 7th denial, up to and including trusted media resources like Al Jazeera on their Twitter, who tweeted out when Israel released a picture of an incinerated baby who was killed on October 7th by Hamas terrorists. Al Jazeera tweeted out that that was a fake AI image, which of course is not true, and in fact was debunked by multiple AI providers saying that the image was authentic. So that was a purposeful piece of disinformation. But in addition to CyberWell's own research around October 7th denial, a separate organization, Cyabra, a for-profit that was formerly employed by Elon Musk before he took over Twitter, found that anywhere between 20 to 40% of the top anti-Israel accounts that were tweeting out October 7th denial were actually being amplified by bots. What does that mean? It's not only that the bots engage with this disinformation, but they're doing it on purpose in order to make sure that that disinformation is seen by as many accounts as possible on the given social media platform. That's how it gets its exposure, and that is how it becomes mainstream. One of the things that I'm happy to share with you is that because CyberWell was regularly working on this issue following October 7th, sharing data, and also really lobbying for just effective enforcement of existing policies and best practices, we were able to bring TikTok to be the first social media platform to recognize that October 7th denial is a prohibited form of content according to its policies, and have been able to track that since we were doing that advocacy work, we've actually brought up the average rate of removal to be about 40% across the social media platforms, which is much more in line with the average rate of removal of anti-Semitism. And I share that with you because I think in today's world where online anti-Semitism is the foremost form of Jew hatred, it is up to us to be in the weeds and to understand how these platforms work. Among other things, specific policies, specific pain points that we have as a community need to be expressed directly to the platforms, and we have seen that it can make incremental improvement and measurable progress. But I really want to share with you guys here this entire process of October 7th. I was able to live monitor it as it happened, unfortunately, on the major social media platforms. But since then, we have seen this cycle repeat. And this really is, I think, the cycle that we're in when it comes to online anti-Semitism, and why are we seeing it perpetuate and spill out into our streets. So first of all, there's some type of organization online. That could be a protest, that could be a protest against selling real estate in Israel, a campus encampment, what have you. That event will inevitably deteriorate because of its anti-Semitic nature and high tensions into targeted violence against Jews, visible Jewish people, humiliation, cursing, pushing into the streets, blocking movement. That content is filmed, recorded, and put into very powerful engagement algorithms. And because of our curiosity and the way that we use social media platforms to be our primary news source most often, we're actually driving engagement and fetishizing the death or physical harm of Jewish people on these platforms. And then there is a denial campaign about the nature of the event, saying that it wasn't anti-Semitic, saying that it was a false flag operation. And that denial campaign, ladies and gentlemen, is always a precursor to calls for more violence. And I know this to be true because I got to see it not only on October 7th, unfortunately, but I saw it again in the response to the Amsterdam pogroms, where there was a purposeful targeting of Israeli soccer fans. What was the denial narrative there? Oh, they were singing racist songs. No, it was a response to somebody ripping down the Palestinian flag. No, there wasn't a purposeful organization of Uber drivers who literally ran people over with their cars. And that's exactly what happened. And again, that denial was a precursor for calls to more violence at other soccer games in France and in Germany. Similarly, during the Amsterdam pogroms and in the response afterwards, we also saw, just like on October 7th, the abuse and iconicization of the Hamas red triangle. This is another thing that very much is an issue when it comes to online anti-Semitism and the way our platforms are being abused today. Very simply, we are also being exposed to a regular normalizing of pro-terror content. The inverted red triangle, just like the Houthi slogan, is official terrorist content that is not being removed at scale and is being used as a weapon to target Jews online and offline. We similarly saw the denial narrative now even as a response to the firebombing that happened in Melbourne, Australia. There were denial narratives around the very viral video clip of Gas the Jews that happened outside the Opera House in Sydney. Misinformation and disinformation being planted. Oh, they didn't exactly say that. It's all with the same agenda of denying the actual anti-Semitic nature of what is happening. And we also see in the denial narrative more broadly, what do I want you to walk away from here? Being able to spot a denial narrative. False flag is one of the most pervasive denial narratives out there. When an anti-Semitic attack occurs, someone turning around and saying this is a false flag operation, it was government planted, it was Mossad planted. This is actually a way of saying that this was a hoax and didn't happen. You go through the entire thread of the denial conspiracy itself. This false flag and victim blaming even happened in the Governor Shapiro incident recently when his home was targeted after the Passover Seder. We saw that the term false flag and Shapiro on X alone yielded about 1,000 or so results with a potential reach of 7.7 million users over the course of the 3 weeks. I should also mention the top accounts promoting this clearly disinformative narrative about Cody Bomber being Jewish, about Josh Shapiro being a Zionist and doing this on purpose to garner sympathy, are also the same accounts that deny the Holocaust and blame Jews for other tragedies such as JFK's assassination. Another thing that's very unique about anti-Semitism today, and anti-Semitism online specifically, next to the denial narrative and the false flag narrative, or blaming Jews for being victims of anti-Semitism, there is also a new resurgence in scapegoating Jews for tragedies that have nothing to do with them. We see this with the New Orleans terror attack. We also saw this with the LA fires, and even blaming the Jews for the recent, but now maybe defunct, ban against TikTok. The reason that I want to make these examples clear is because I know that there is a mental disconnect between very clean language like scapegoating. What does scapegoating mean? It means blaming Jews for the TikTok ban. It means blaming Jews for 9/11. It means blaming Jews for the LA fires. And again, you may hear that and think, okay, this is very tertiary, very extreme. But the point is, if this is regularly being platformed for millions of people at a time, again, there's that threshold effect of becoming indifferent to the blaming of Jews for everything and anything. And the real kicker is when you blame the Jews for something that's going to charge an entire society into some form of hysteria. And some would argue that accusation today is the accusation of genocide. So, what's next, or what can be done in this situation? First of all, I really want to share with you guys that the more specific digital policies are, the more effective they are at being enforced. And the good news side of things, or not so great news, obviously the October 7th denial narrative has also affected how much Holocaust denial and distortion has been being platformed on these social media platforms as well. We've seen a steady increase in the rise of about 3% annually since CyberWell launched. However, again, because the policy is very specific and says point blank, Holocaust denial is not allowed, we see that the rates of removal of Holocaust denial or abuse when it's reported to the social media platforms is far beyond what we're used to seeing with other forms of anti-Semitism. In fact, Holocaust denial is probably the best enforced form of anti-Semitism online because the policy is specific. As well, because CyberWell has been flagging this information of Holocaust denial directly to the platforms in multiple languages, and again, the policy is clear, we've seen that the gap between Holocaust denial in English and in Arabic in terms of rates of removal has gone up significantly on the social media platforms in the last few years. So I say this again because I believe that if we want to solve this issue together, we need to know how these systems work. The more specific a policy is, the more effective the platforms are going to be at removing that specific type of content. What CyberWell is going to be focusing on is working with our social media platform partners to break this cycle of justification, denial, victim blaming, and calls for additional violence. We are also going to be working regularly with our platforms to improve policy adoption and nuanced enforcement. And of course, we have to be aware that there's a new reality. Platforms are shifting away, especially since the announcement of Meta, towards less content removal and more emphasis on free speech and de-amplification. De-amplification means making sure that that information is contained. So if that's the case, we need to demand of social media platforms to be more responsive and more effective in their responses, meaning more quickly. The other thing that I really want to stress for this group today is that reporting online anti-Semitism when you see it is absolutely crucial. The American Jewish Committee recently released its annual survey on the state of anti-Semitism in America. Over 67% of American Jews report experiencing online anti-Semitism, but only 1 in 3 of them take the time to report it. And this is a responsibility that's not just a Jewish responsibility. Anti-Semitism is an issue for all of us. Anti-Semitism is a systemic deterioration of our society, of our cohesion, and of our harmony. So if you see online anti-Semitism and you take that 1 extra minute to report it, you will be making use of the resource that the platforms are making available to you. And another really important thing that a lot of people tend not to understand is that when you report content and you take the time to report it or appeal it, any kind of decision that a human content moderator makes on that piece of content actually informs the algorithms and the automatic features inside of the social media platform, which means that content is more likely to be contained or even removed from the platform. So when you report something, it doesn't just go into the human moderator, it goes actually into the technology of the platform itself, which is why it's so important to exhaust that bottom-up type of reporting. And finally, CyberWell is going to continue to work with our partners at the Florida Holocaust Museum and also work with our own technology partners to launch additional AI tools and user reporting tools to make more scalable efforts against the issue of online anti-Semitism. I would also say that one of the crucial and practical things that you can do to fight back against this horrible phenomenon is to ensure that social media and big tech reform is a bipartisan issue. This is an issue that affects all of us. Social media and big tech has basically been allowed to evolve and flourish completely outside of the hands of the regulator. And this is a bipartisan issue. It affects all of us very much on a day-to-day basis. I mentioned there were very clear national security issues that happened on October 7th with our platforms being hijacked, but this is really also about our physical and mental wellness, child protection as well. And on that note, I really do believe we need to also be engaged on the issue of digital literacy as core curriculum for our high school and even middle school students. You today are already taking a really great step by being on a webinar like this in our previous speaker series, which actually further your own education on the issue of digital literacy and information integrity. Thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions. And Miranda, you are on mute.
You're muted.
Thank you. Having a lot of challenges today. Tal-Or, that was incredible. Thank you so much. That was a lot of really great information. So thank you again for putting that together and taking the time to share it with us today. I'd like to invite our audience to submit some questions now into the Q&A box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen. And let's see what we've got so far. Okay, the first question I see is, when these posts are flagged and removed, what happens to the account that posted it? Are they monitored or researched or expelled/suspended, or is it too hard to do that?
It's a great question, and I think this also goes back to the original active recommendation of this session, which is every social media platform has something called a strike policy. So for example, on YouTube, it's the baseball rule: 3 times over 90 days. If you violate policy, you're out. So one of the reasons that we call on people to actually take the extra time to report an account or report a link every time you see it is because your report is going to contribute to that person's strike policy. In fact, it's very safe to assume that if someone is promoting anti-Semitism and you're seeing it, they've done it before and maybe already have a strike against them. So on a user-to-user level, this is why it's very important to report accounts that are flagging anti-Semitism. If you want to be extra diligent and you see someone spreading anti-Semitism, go into their account and see what else they've put out there. You may be responsible yourself for shutting that person down. CyberWell, specifically in our compliance work with the platforms, really focuses on narrative analysis and closing the digital policy gaps. So these platforms have their rules, and we believe that if we were living in a world where rules were being enforced against anti-Semitism at a 60% better rate, we would see 90% less anti-Semitism online. So that's what we're very focused on, but we have, of course, been responsible for taking out repeat abusers of the social media platforms.
Thank you. I have another question. Have you collected any data on anti-Semitism that happens on gaming platforms, or can you speak about that?
It's a wonderful question, and we would love to do it in the future, of course, because gaming is no less popular than social media and perhaps more formidable in terms of how our young people are using it. And the other thing is that I think it's really important to also mention CyberWell's content analysis is based off of posts. It doesn't even touch how people actually experience anti-Semitism today in digital spaces. They experience it in the comment section. They experience it in DMs. I not only know about this in terms of social media, so why am I highlighting that for you? It's a 360-degree experience. You're reading news about anti-Semitism. You're seeing anti-Semitism being posted. Anti-Semitism is coming to your comment section if you're openly Jewish online, and even in your DMs. The same is true for gaming and dating apps. I've even received people sending me in today in dating apps being harassed and targeted openly just by having a Jewish last name. So this is the world that we're in right now, and I think that it really puts a spotlight on the importance of corporate social responsibility in this moment. Deborah Lipstadt also in our conversations shared with me, anti-Semitism doesn't look the way that it used to in the 1930s in the sense that it's not state sponsored. And she would be correct, but it's corporate sponsored, maybe inadvertently, but it's corporate platformed for sure. So the opportunity that I see there is that unlike the Der Stolmel news syndicate of the Nazi Party, which is a state-owned newspaper, and we couldn't ever control that even if we were around back then, right? But these systems are systems that can be fixed. The digital service providers, be they social media, internet, or AI companies, have all decided to govern themselves and regulate themselves. We have to make a very clear expectation and create very clear solutions to demand that they enforce those rules when it comes to digital Jew hatred.
Perfect. Thank you for answering that. That leads to the next question I have here. How can we influence the social platforms to do more on their monitoring and keep to policy?
Excellent question. I think the way that we can do this on a people level is to remain engaged with our local and federal lawmakers. I think that there was kind of a moment at the beginning of this current administration where there were shifts announced and it just kind of like went by everybody. No, this issue, you guys have now learned about misinformation, disinformation, the horrific state of online anti-Semitism, the issue of social media reform, the issue of big tech reform needs to remain a bipartisan issue and an issue of public interest. At the end of the day, our lawmakers work for us. If they hear from you that this is important, they will continue to make it an issue themselves.
Great. Okay, next question. What is next for the partnership between the FHM and CyberWell?
And Mike, do you want to take it or do you want me to take it?
We'll share. How about that?
Okay.
I'll let you go first. You're running, so keep going.
Okay. So this was a wonderful manifestation of our partnership with the FHM, and we are currently working on a very unique display that would bring some of the insights of online anti-Semitism and specifically Holocaust abuse online to part of a virtual or digital installment that's available to the FHM visitors.
And the goal, as always, is to not only look sort of backwards in terms of using the lessons of the Holocaust in order to propel us forward, but doing so in a visceral and emotional and connectable way. And what visitors will experience inside the museum in particular, but also outside the museum is, we're lucky enough, if that's the right word, to have over 25,000 artifacts. And those include the version in the 30s of what we were talking about today, really over the 3 programs, but even most particularly today, that Tal-Or has done an absolutely, I have to say, incredible job of articulating today. And you can see why about a year and a half ago, we were introduced to each other through a mutual colleague who said, I think you guys both see the future is sort of the same way, that we need to, tweak things to an extent. And it was an understatement when I was introduced to Tal-Or. I mean, it's just such a pleasure and honor. We're so lucky to have her affiliating and CyberWell affiliating with us at the museum. And what people will experience is that, again, inside and outside the museum, you will see how through our artifacts, you are bridged to today through CyberWell. People need to see how real this is. These lessons are not things that just happened 80 some odd years ago. The ingredients of the soup, as I call them often, are alive and well today. And we don't have to be staring state-sponsored genocide in the face to need to be able to do something about it, to be compelled to do something about it. That is what we learned from the Holocaust. And I think Tal-Or just brought a great sort of example home where, she talked about state-sponsored media and how we might not have had the opportunity, the same kind of opportunity to do something about it as it relates to the media and the dissemination of information. Well, as she so articulately said, that's not the case today. And so we do have the power to do something about this. And that's what this is for. And that's why arming us with this information is so valuable. And that's where that bridge lives. That's what, again, people will experience inside the museum and outside, as well as we continue to work together on an ongoing basis.
Absolutely. I'm very, very proud of the partnership that we have. I was very inspired by the way that Mike speaks about the Florida Holocaust Museum in terms of his vision specifically about meeting people where they are. And I always think that if anybody has an effective and powerful experience at a Holocaust museum, they all are always looking for, what does this mean for me? And the truth of the matter is, again, as I said, the place where anti-Semitism is most prevalent today, the place where you're most likely to experience it as a Jewish person or a non-Jewish person, is actually online. So right there, you have an opportunity and hopefully a shared sense of responsibility after witnessing the horrors of what happens when anti-Semitism goes systemic. You do have a role to play. The threat is very real and it's very near and very present. One of the first things that you can do genuinely is to use your digital platforms more responsibly, more actively, and report anti-Semitism when you see it, or at the very minimum, call it out, and be aware that this is the first frontier where Jews are experiencing the same exact hatred of the 1930s right now, every day.
Tal-Or, do you have any advice if we are encountering such posts online? You know, I've experienced the pushback, the ugliness that comes for calling that out directly. It gets very personal and very nasty from complete strangers. And I think that might be intimidating to people, understandably, just don't want to get involved in that ugliness. Do you have any advice on how to engage in that without, with courage and without getting into the fray?
Okay, it's a great question. So first of all, for your own safety, in case you haven't done this already, you should probably have your profile on private. Number one, I don't think people are aware that's not the go-to setting. If you have Facebook, if you have Instagram, TikTok, you have to make your account private first. In fact, my husband made me make my account private after I started CyberWell because he was like, listen, people are going to come for you. He was correct. So first of all, make your accounts private, and that is already going to take out a lot of the concern about physical safety, which is a legitimate concern, having your information available, your name available, etc. Second of all, decide for yourself what is the level of courage and engagement that you want to have. As I mentioned, even reporting anti-Semitism, if you want that information removed or you want to contribute to that account's strike policy, if you take an extra step and go in and see if that account is actually public and go ahead and report other stuff that they have posted, you're already being more active than the average person by a lot. When you engage with somebody publicly and call out anti-Semitism, you should know who you are engaging for. You're not engaging for the person who posted anti-Semitism. You're engaging for the most social media users that are passive users and will look at your interaction. So if you can keep that in mind, kind of like, I'm not speaking to this person, I'm speaking to an audience. I'm speaking to someone who will come across this information and see it and just focus on that person as the one that you're influencing instead of the misinformed, ill-informed, or hostile person that you're engaging with. And again, it really depends. Everybody has to define at this time for themselves. What does resilience look like? What does responsibility look like? Okay. The nice thing about online is that you're pretty safe. It's not the same thing as being an upstander in a public situation, although this is the moment that we're in. It's very unfortunate to say, but I feel compelled to say it. Anti-Semitism is cool again. I don't need any other proof aside from everything from what happened at Coachella to Kanye West's new song, Heil Hitler. It's coming from every direction possible. It's being imbued into culture. And I really believe it's our responsibility as normal people to just make really sure it's unacceptable. If you see it in any place possible, if it's online or if it's offline, to say something, to do something, to not allow it to go by you, because Elie Wiesel wrote and spoke about this very many times. The indifference, systemic indifference to the hostility and the dehumanization, that's where we start going wrong. So as long as you're doing something, you're doing a lot.
And one thing to affirm on that too, Professor Wiesel, he also, I think it's important because you touched on this too, Tal-Or, he spoke about like how he would choose to spend his time in terms of who he was speaking to. And you have to focus on people who are willing to listen, and not somebody who's just looking to argue. We don't have a lot of time here. We're all busy, number one. Number two, things are getting worse. So we need to spend our time wisely. And I run into this a lot in my position, Tal-Or, I suspect you do too, where you are often faced, or it's assumed you are hungry to face somebody who is just attempting to outshout you. you're best off finding someone who's not even interested in shouting and actually wants to listen and learn. And that goes whether you're face to face with somebody or whether it's online. I mean, either way, those are forms of communication. So I think it's an important lesson from Professor Wiesel also. We all have this inclination to want to battle the loudest person, especially in our roles. But it's not where the value is so often spent. You know, people often say or that they question, what would I do if I were, you know, when they're in sort of in the midst of sort of either coming through the museum or being exposed to the lessons. You can't help but question yourself, what would I do if I were in that situation? You know, that's part of what Holocaust education and memory are designed to do, I think, is to press you, using these memories, using these lessons to press you into that question. We have an opportunity to answer it now. What would I do? Show us what you would do, Jewish and non-Jewish. You know, we've seen the best and the worst in people, the way my grandparents used to say it. Now we've got tools that we didn't have. This is that moment, and that's, I think, what we want to compel in people. Do it smart, be safe, but do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think those are two perfect answers, and I invite you both if you have any closing thoughts. Otherwise, I just want to say thank you very much for joining us today and for sharing your knowledge and your wisdom and your enthusiasm. And hopefully everybody's leaving here feeling ready to do what needs to be done to continue to make the world better. So if you have any thoughts, please share.
I'll just share that I think that I really want to focus on the opportunity here. Okay. So social media, as we saw in this brief presentation, is a place that can be wildly abused, but it's a place that can also be used for connection, empowerment, and support. So even if you don't want to engage with someone who is hostile, ill-informed, anti-Semitic online, even doing basic acts of solidarity and visibility and standing against anti-Semitism in whatever way that means for you, that already has a larger audience than what you would get in a one-on-one interaction. So even that is an opportunity in and of itself. And again, even though it's up to us to decide how the latest technologies and algorithms are going to influence our world for the better or the worse, they are technologies that are systems and they can be fixed. And that really is something that keeps me very focused on our goal at CyberWell. That's an opportunity. That's something that's measurable. And I just think that we need to really constantly explore the opportunities that technology provides us at this time as effective ways to rise up against this current hatred.
I know better than Tal-Or, so I would just say that I want to emphasize again the relationship between the museum and CyberWell. This is our introduction to the public, and the number of venues, I know I've said it a few times, but I've done so intentionally, inside our four walls, but also outside, because anti-Semitism exists everywhere, and so too do we need to be everywhere. So we will be working in schools, we will be working in corporate environments, and so the key here is that our goal is to ultimately be everywhere with these tools, because that's where they're needed.
Absolutely.
Thank you both very much, and thank you to our audience, and we'll see you soon. Take care.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.